Here in the viewport I have a bunch of cylindrical objects. Now some of these objects have quite a lot of detail going around. I have these kind of sci-fi cylindrical objects here in the front row, and these were just made using traditional beveling. And then I have a couple of subdivided examples here in the back row. Now obviously when you're making objects like this, you don't really want to be going round and modelling this detail all around the object again and again and again, as that is a very tedious workflow. So we need to devise some kind of way where we could split these objects into a pie slice, work on one slice, and then copy the geometry around. Now some of these objects could be made just in simple symmetry, like these two middle objects here. You can see they're symmetrical on the z-axis and the x-axis. They only have 4 details. And then we have some of these objects here that have 8 details. Again, these could be done in symmetry. Now, the complications come when you have objects that have an odd number of sides, like this little synth knob up here, or this mechanical plate here. So I'm just going to give you an example of the kind of workflow that we can use to build these objects very, very, very quickly. So here's the workflow that I found works best for these sort of objects, and you can end up making very complex things in a matter of minutes. So let's do a very simple example. I'm going to create a disk, give it 16 segments. Let's make that editable. Now let's say I want a shape that has a circle inside each one of these polygons here. So that would be 16 circles going all the way around. Now instead of trying to do this on the whole object, what I'm essentially going to do is just take a segment and work on this segment. Now I've usually found that it's best if this segment is aligned straight to the x-axis. So what we'll need to do is actually rotate this object so this edge becomes flat. Now I can do this by just going, I want this to rotate in a minus direction, so I'd say minus 360 divided by, then in brackets I'd put the amount of sides and just times that by 2 to effectively get half the angle of one of these segments, and then hit apply, and you can see that this bottom edge is lining up here. Then I can just reset the axis by hitting enable axis modification, putting this back to 0, say apply, and take it out of that mode. So now I'll take my polygons that I have here, go UI, invert, delete, and then optimize all the spare points. So now I could come into this polygon and just inner extrude it. Let's just size this up. Now currently this polygon only has 4 sides, and to make a decent circle you need a minimum of 6 sides. So I could grab my knife tool, deselect, cut through here like that. And now I obviously have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 edges. So to make this into a circle, I can grab this free plugin. It's called Polycircle, very worth getting. Kind of come in here, make sure I've got equal interval on. And now I can just size this up and make a circle. Come out of that tool, I'll have to rotate this. Sometimes it doesn't always work properly. And now I have what it will effectively, when subdivided, be a perfect circle. So now I have my one segment done, and now I want to sort of rotate this or clone this round. Now I could use the MoGraph cloner, but it may be overkill. In fact, a better thing to use here is the array object. So option click, add the object to the array, and we get this result. Now I have my radius set to 0 by default. I think Cinema has it set to about 250. So you might notice that the array creates something like this. I have mine set to 0 and then have it set as default like so. So I obviously need some more sections. I'm going to need 15 plus my original geometry makes 16. And now I have this kind of thing going on. Now, the major advantage of using something like the array for this is that this geometry is still live. So if I grab my inner extrude, check preserve groups, and extrude inwards, you can see this updates on every segment. Now, obviously, having to manually do this on each segment would be a complete waste of time because this takes you seconds. Now, the array tool doesn't have any of the kind of snap points on symmetry edge or delete polygons on symmetry edge. So you'll find that when you are manipulating the geometry, you'll find that if you do something like an extrude like this, you'll get spare polys left over that you can just delete. And obviously you can see just by, manipulating this very simple piece of geometry, we can start to add detail very quick. You'll also notice that the array tool doesn't weld any of these edge points together. So if I were to subdivide it, we would get breaks in the subdivision, especially here in this center point. So what we need to do is put the array into a connect object, and that will solve all our problems. Now, watch out for the connect object, as it has this funky Phong mode thing going on. If I just quickly render this, you'll notice a load of Phong breaks. And you need to set Phong mode to manual, and that will get rid of that. So now I could come in here, select these polys, just extrude down like so, and I'm obviously able to build up detail very quickly. I could just sharpen these edges up. Just do a solid chamfer here. And you can see we can build up detail very quick. So this little stack of connect array down to your geometry is very handy for these radial shapes. This technique will work with a shape of any sides, so it doesn't matter whether it's even-sided or odd-sided, 5 sides, 7 sides, it doesn't really matter. So let's take this one step further, and let's say I want to add some detail into this ring here, but I only want it to occur 8 times. What I would essentially do is take my connect object, turn this into an editable object by hitting C, and then I would come in and select 2 portions of this to work with. Just selecting these polys. I've got only select visible elements turned off, so I'm grabbing them all. UI, delete, optimize. Now obviously I want this object to be planar, so I would have to rotate this minus 11.25. Axis enable tool, reset this back to 0, and uncheck this, and then we're back in the room. So what I'm going to do here is just a very simple inner extrude operation. Something like that. I'll inner extrude it again for a little cut. Come to here. Just do something like this. Then I can throw this into an array. I only need 7 sides. That's my default. Connect. subdivide, make sure I'm on manual Fong, and now we have this. So it's a bit basic, but you can see how easy it is to just keep adding detail of different amounts to your object. And you'll find you'll do this a lot with symmetry too, connecting the object up, merging it into a single object, re-breaking it down into different types of symmetry, just continuing your workflow until you're done. Now, the amount of detail that you can put in is very dependent on the amount of sides that you start out with. I'm very limited to the amount of detail, especially cutting corner detail, I have with this 16-sided shape, purely because I can't cut outwards, because it's going to destroy the nice circular nature under subdivisions, and I'll end up with loads of lumps. But we'll be discussing cylindrical objects and just how much geometry you need later on. Now, there is one more technique you can use to make circular arrays, and I'll show you that very quickly. Now, if I select all of this geometry, Command A, Control A, I can come up into Mesh and come to Commands, and we have this thing called the Clone command. Now, this is like a very basic version of the MoGraph cloner. So you can see we have the amount of clones, blah, blah, blah. We have lots of rotation stuff and axis and variation in your cloning. So I basically need to apply this. So I'm going to hit apply and you'll see that nothing happens. And I want 7 clones. And again, nothing's happened. That's because we need to rotate this. And as if by magic, if I come up to 315, so this number is the rotational value minus the rotational value of your original geometry. And then I can just deselect all of that, and I would actually have to optimize this geometry. This kind of thing is done when you know that your geometry is finished, and it's just another way of doing it. It's not quite as versatile as the other way because essentially your geometry isn't really live anymore in regards to this section. I just want to show you one more very quick and kind of cool example of what you can do with our little connect array and geometry with the inclusion of a bend deformer. I have this piece of geometry here. And when I subdivide this, you can see I get this nice smooth floral shape here. This is just made out of simple geometry, I guess. We'll be looking at how we make shapes like this later on. It's just been control cut. What I can do here is put this into a bend deformer and bend this round 30 degrees. Add this to an array, like so, with 11 copies, so we have 12 sections. And 360 divided by 12 is 30, which is where I got my bend angle from. Connect this up, subdivide, and what we essentially get is something that looks like this. Now again, this looks quite complex, and this could be really good for like sort of ornate circular details on objects. And it's just another example of what you can do with this stack. So hopefully this has given you some ideas about how you would go about creating some of these radial shapes. And I'll come back and build a load of these later on when we get into subdivision, so you can see how easy these kind of things are to build.